today to listen to Dr. Strayer talk about how you have led us in the past. We trust that you will lead us safely into the future because you have been faithful to us in the past. And so as we listen once again to the presentation today, may you speak through his humble lips of clay, that your name may be glorified and that your people may be edified, so that we may be powerful witnesses to your grace and love to the world that you died to save. So thank you once again for blessing us today, for we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Once again, if there's anyone here who has not received the questionnaire, the 30-question sheet, raise your hand, and I think Ramon will make sure you get that. And the tour brochure. Oh, there's lots of room for tour members to sign up. We hope you will do so. All right, Ramon, make sure they get that. Excellent, excellent. And this afternoon, many of you have been asking, when are you going to get to the Holy Flesh movement? This afternoon, all right, at the afternoon seminar at 4:15, be sure to bring all your friends from Evansville and Muncie, okay? Let's have all the Adventists from Evansville and Muncie show up this afternoon, because that's where the Holy Flesh movement had its heart, its center, its headquarters, all right? Okay, well, we're ready to go. Yep, it's on the screen. The proliferation of church buildings also meant that Adventists had more sacred spaces in which to hold Sabbath schools, worship services, and quarterly meetings. By the end of the 1880s, there were 80 different Adventist congregations across the state. And here's the list on the screen. 80 locations where Adventist services were being held every Sabbath. Members invited their friends, their neighbors, even ministers of other denominations to join them in washing one another's feet, partaking of the wafer and the wine, and sharing heartfelt testimonies during the social meetings. Typically, these Friday to Sunday quarterly meetings were crowded with a variety of worship services and learning activities. In addition to the foot washing, communion, and testimony services, believers also participated in Sabbath school, missionary, temperance, and tract and missionary society meetings. Once a year, most congregations also elected the officers of these organizations for the next year. They also examined the spiritual condition of every member, either by listening to their oral testimonies or by publicly reading the letters they sent ahead if they were unable to attend. And as I mentioned yesterday, those who failed to report their spiritual condition for 6 months were deemed cold in the Lord, and their names were dropped from church membership. In the March 29, 1881 review, President Sands Lane urged those members who were unable to attend a quarterly meeting to send in their written reports. "Let your brethren know that you still love the truth," he exclaimed. Frequently, baptisms also took place during these weekends, as when J.P. Henderson and C.M. Shortridge baptized 8 souls in the beautiful Mississinoa River. I hope I pronounced that right. Mississinowa, Mississinoa River near Marion in July of '85. Finally, the treasurers reported on the financial health of each church, whether or not the members had been faithful in returning their tithes and offerings and giving the suggested 1 penny a week for Sabbath school offering. Well, time and space will not permit us to describe every Sabbath school. I would like to mention some of the unique features of a few of them. For example, beginning in 1882, W.A. Young of Union City started mailing out blanks, meaning printed forms, to all the church clerks so that they could report the condition of their members at the end of every quarter. Throughout the decade, the Conference Sabbath School Association, its headquarters was at 32 Cherry Street in Indianapolis, held annual institutes during the camp meetings. It took measures to improve the singing ability of Sabbath school groups. It encouraged local teachers to meet for planning sessions once a week. It sought to provide blackboards for every Sabbath school room, and it made sure that each church received an adequate supply of the Advent Reviews, the Youth Instructor, and Signs of the Times, so that its members could study their weekly Sabbath school lesson. And finally, it encouraged the Sabbath school teachers to utilize creative techniques for making the Sabbath school a delightful time for little girls and boys. Now, apparently the teachers at the Frankton Church were doing this. For in June of 1881, Elder M.G. Huffman described their Sabbath school as a decided success. Noblesville, which also had a blue ribbon Sabbath school, organized perhaps the very first Warden and Vestryman Society and elected several trustees to administer their church property in July of 1881. This sounds strange to our ears because in the 20th century, conferences took over the ownership of local churches and their property. But that was not the case in the 19th century. You needed a vestryman's association to do that job. The members at Wolf Lake spent $18, that'd be about $450 today, on maps to enliven their Sabbath school in '84. Not to be outdone, the members of the model school in Ligonier spent $30 on maps. That'd be over $750 today. And they ordered 62 subscriptions to the Youth Instructor. They had the largest number of children studying the brand new Bible lessons for little ones in their school. Top honors, of course, goes to the Adventists up in North Liberty, for their Sabbath school had been meeting continuously since 1854, over 30 years. It was the oldest in the conference. And yet the conference contained several Sabbath schools described as models or excellent. Bourbon in '81, Brookston had 60 members then, '84, New Marion in '85, Indianapolis in '87, and Kokomo in '88. Thanks largely to the organization of the Indiana Tract and Missionary Society in 1872, the literature ministry across this state really took off during the 1880s, when the state was divided into 7 different districts. Under the leadership of President Sands Lane and S.S. Schrock as secretary, the T&M, as they were known, tract and missionary officials regularly visited every local church each quarter. By the end of the decade, the T&M Society had quadrupled its membership to 527 members, who submitted a whopping 898 reports, indicating that they had mailed 694 missionary letters to their neighbors. They had made 21,917 missionary visits. They had given 504 Bible readings to 2,018 individuals. They had secured 549 periodical subscriptions. And they had distributed over 2,318,800 pages of books and pamphlets, and brought in $6,385 in contributions. This amazing growth justified the oft-stated claim by President Sands Lane and other ministers here in Indiana that the cause is onward in Indiana. In addition to peddling periodicals such as Review and Herald and Signs of the Times, a growing body of canvassing agents, there were 29 by 1887, Bible workers and laity, sold copies of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg's journal Good Health. Remember, he had renamed it from the Health Reformer. He said, nobody wants to be reformed anymore. Health Reformer to Good Health. The children's storybook, Sunshine at Home, and oh, how Ellen White loved the children's stories in Sunshine at Home. And the new religious liberty magazine, the American Sentinel, and an evangelistic tract entitled The Gospel Sickle, all of which they could obtain from the City Mission Depot at 32 Cherry Street in Indianapolis. It was later, under Anna Green as the director, moved to 175 Central Avenue. Colporteurs in those days actually signed contracts agreeing to cover a certain territory in a certain amount of time in their district. They regularly reported their hours and the amount of literature they sold. And they were told to knock on every door because a single book could decide the destiny of whole families. And when I was a student colporteur in the 1960s, we as well were told to knock on every door. Ignore the barking dogs. Ignore the swearing homeowners. Knock on the doors anyway. Between 1887 and 1890, the T&M team mailed thousands of copies of the American Sentinel to the Indiana governor, every single state senator and representative, every judge in the state, the editors of every newspaper, and every lawyer whose address they could find in Indiana's 92 counties. Are you still doing that? That is a big job, isn't it? And they asked for their support in defeating U.S. Senator Blair's National Sunday Bill. Church members were also urged to sign and circulate petitions against that Sunday bill. Canvassers also peddled popular Adventist books. Perhaps one of the top sellers in the 1880s was Uriah Smith's new book, Marvel of Nations. Another favorite, as you might guess, was Ellen White's recently revised and updated Great Controversy. Both of these books proved useful in combating Senator Blair's Sunday bill and counteracting the influence of the National Reform Association and the Women's Christian Temperance Union, both of which favored state Sunday blue laws, something Adventists at that time in Indiana called the vampire of our liberties. In December of 1888, T&M Secretary R.B. Craig called for more canvassers to sell the new book, Bible Readings for the Home Circle. He stated, "We need to get this book in every neighborhood in Indiana by Christmas." Craig's dream was that every third home in every village, town, and city in the state would have a copy of Bible Readings before the end of the year. A year later, President Frank Starr rejoiced that 8 times as many subscription books had been sold in the state during 1889 than had been sold in 1888. And he called for one single member in every Adventist church to become a canvassing agent. By the end of the 80s, at least 24 canvassers were blanketing Indiana with magazines and books. New colporteur recruits fanned out across the state, selling Adventist literature. C.F. Jenkins in Newton County, Brother and Sister Wiley over in Wabash, H.E. Giddings and J.A. Dolson in Lafayette, to mention a few of their names. In addition to these full-time colporteurs, many congregations became active in the literature work during the 1880s. At least 32 that we know of formed vigilant missionary societies. That was the term used for a local branch of the Indiana Tract and Missionary Society. Now, time and space will not permit discussing all of them, But what follows is a description of several of the most outstanding ones. And here's the list of the blue ribbon ones. During 1882 and 83, 82% of the T&M members in Rochester, 87% of those in Noblesville, and 91% of those in Greensboro reported their activities, an extremely high percentage. Noblesville had one of the most ethnically diverse societies in the state. Besides ordering the review in English, some of the members there read the German paper, and others read the Swedish paper. Believers in Bunker Hill provided 20 sets of Adventist books for the state reading rooms in downtown Indianapolis. J.P. Henderson praised the society over in Brookston in 1886, stating that the members there excelled in the T&M work. Over in Kewanna, even the children were active in distributing Adventist tracts and pamphlets. The society in Waldron invited all of the members living in southeast Indiana to grab their bedding and come to a week-long T&N convention in January of 1890. And to their great surprise, the General Conference President, Ole Olson, showed up at the meetings. In the 1880s, as I've mentioned, Indianapolis served as the conference headquarters, 175 Central Avenue. This is what it used to be looking like 130 years ago. With the state tract and missionary headquarters, the book depository, and the inner city mission, which was at 14 Indiana Avenue. By 1888, 4 colporteurs, 2 men and 2 women, and 5 female Bible workers lived at that city mission. Here, new church workers received their training, and evangelistic meetings reaped new converts. Now, in addition to the Indiana Sabbath School Association and the Indiana Tract and Missionary Society, the conference sponsored a very active Health and Temperance Society. Nelson W. Cauble was the president. John W. Covert was the secretary. Although most Hoosier Adventists had gained the victory over tobacco, tea, coffee, alcohol, and drugs, by 1880, a few still struggled to give up their pork. In fact, probably more than half of the Adventists in the state still ate the clean meats, such as chicken, beef, mutton, venison, and turkey. Nonetheless, the Health and Temperance Society, which, like the Sabbath School and T&M societies, held annual conventions during camp meetings, sought to inspire members to share the Adventist health message with the public. And since one of its leaders, Dr. William Hill, was a physician, he frequently gave lectures on healthful diet and temperance, illustrated with charts and graphs. Furthermore, at workers' meetings, the H&T representatives ran a boarding tent that provided health foods from Battle Creek Sanitarium that were described in the review as, quote, palatable and healthful. Notice the word delicious is not included there. Yes, palatable and healthful, though not always delicious. Although space and time will not permit a full description of every health and temperance activity sponsored by some 27 Adventist congregations in Indiana, I'd like to highlight a few outstanding efforts, and here are the blue ribbon groups. In May of 1880, Arthur Bartlett praised the 25 members of the Walkerton Church, many of whom had been inveterate and excessive tobacco users, he said, but by God's help, they have thoroughly cleansed themselves from this filthiness of the flesh. Over in Zionsville, Victor Thompson likewise congratulated many of the 20 Adventists there who had given up tobacco and other injurious habits. The health reformers in Mechanicsburg proved so zealous that the Ladies' Christian Temperance Union asked them to furnish the library in Richmond with Adventist temperance books and subscriptions to Good Help and Signs of the Times in 1880. Occasionally, Adventist evangelists who stood tall for temperance found their efforts stymied by the presence of taverns and saloons, and there were hundreds of them in Indiana. This happened to Elder William Covert in the summer of 1882 when he attempted to deliver a temperance lecture in Corey. But the whiskey interests, as he called them, opposed him. He said, "Alcohol is king in this community of 200 citizens with 2 stores and 2 saloons." He repeatedly had to ask men not to smoke inside his evangelistic tent. David Overholtzer rejoiced in January of '84 to see the saints over at Middletown discarding tea, pork, coffee, and other harmful substances and adopting the health message and tithing. J.M. Rees and M.G. Huffman encountered a few diehards in Olive Branch and DuPont, however, who were still struggling to give up tobacco that winter. Unlike the saints over in Rochester, they not only dispensed with tobacco, pork, tea, and coffee, but all the women in the Rochester Adventist Church had adopted the plain reform dress as well. And we saw a slide yesterday that showed just exactly how plain that reform dress was. When he entered Corunna in the spring of '87, J.P. Henderson discovered that starting his evangelistic meetings with lectures on temperance, hygiene, and social purity removed the prejudice of local people and paved the way for him to introduce biblical doctrines thereafter. Otho Godsmark adopted the same approach when he preached in Bogstown in May of '87. As a result, many attendees who had eaten pork all their lives successfully gave it up. Perhaps the blue ribbon, however, should go to Elder F.M. Roberts, whose temperance lectures in Idaville in November of '87 not only caused many to give up their tobacco, but also inspired the local non-Adventist citizens to demand the moving of a saloon that was in running order out of town. I would certainly call that a moving sermon, wouldn't you? Wow. They moved the saloon out of town. Nonetheless, as late as 1889, W.C. Wales and his wife Lucinda, shown here, bemoaned the fact that in Indiana the use of pork and tobacco was an almost universal habit among the public. Well, human willpower proved sufficient for some individuals to break lifelong habits of smoking and drinking. Occasionally, it required the intervention of a divine hand to restore a person to full health. Arthur W. Bartlett witnessed such a case in the spring of 1881 when he was visiting Adventists in North Liberty, Walkerton, Ligonier, Wolf Lake, and Blue Cross. He said among the Adventists in those churches, some were exhibiting a great lack of faith, and many of them doubted God's love and power, and they greatly feared that they would be lost. Well, in their midst was a woman in the terminal stages of tuberculosis. Her physician had told her there was no help left for her. But Elder Bartlett anointed her with oil and prayed over her, and she was instantly healed and sat up in bed. After a good night's sleep, she ate a hearty breakfast the next morning. I like to quote J.N. Loughborough about those experiences. Elder John Loughborough put it this way. He said, "Such divine intervention moments are a green oasis in the desert of life." Isn't that beautiful? A green oasis when God intervenes miraculously. Well, we're at a camp meeting, so let's go to the camp meetings of the 1880s, okay? No air conditioning. All right. The camp meetings of the 1880s. Camp meetings in the 1880s, like those of the previous decade, were intended to revive the spiritual lives of Adventist members and convert the public. Well, hundreds of Adventists camped on the grounds during the week. On the weekends, several thousand strangers, as we called non-Adventists, from all the surrounding farms and villages would crowd the big tents. Rather than being located on a permanent campground, these 5 to 7 day gatherings rotated around the state every summer. And here's a list of the 1880s camp meetings year by year. Although the Rochester camp meeting was scheduled for September 23 to 27, 1880, a pre-session for church workers took place from the 17th to the 22nd. Family tents could be rented, and Sands Lane requested that members bring their Sabbath school songbooks for the children. Systematic Benevolence treasurers also instructed them to bring the funds they had collected for each quarter that we may be able to settle with the ministers, which gives me a clue that ministers were not paid weekly. They were paid quarterly. Could you stretch that paycheck over 3 months? Yeah. Quarterly. Churches also chose delegates to represent them at the Sabbath School Association meetings and at the conference business session that followed. Both in September of 81 and October of 82, the camp meetings were held in Marion, which had 3 different railroads converging, making travel relatively easy for distant Adventists. There, in a beautiful maple grove, 350 members pitched 37 family tents, and 116 believers in only 25 minutes gave brief, heartwarming testimonies. Could you give your testimony in 12 seconds? That's about what it was, 12 seconds apiece. 75 came forward for prayers. On Sunday, over 2,000 local citizens attended the meetings, many of whom were deeply moved by the baptism of 8 converts in the nearby river and the ordination of Sanford Rogers and J.P. Henderson to the gospel ministry. Pioneer preachers, and here's another husband and wife preaching team, John and Julia Corliss of Michigan, thrilled the crowd with their doctrinal sermons. To multiply the revival and evangelistic impact of camp meetings, conference officials in 1883 decided to hold 2 such gatherings, one in Bunker Hill for those living in the northern and central regions, and the other one in Farmersburg for those living farther south. The Bunker Hill site, which was only a quarter mile from the railroad station, had a pleasant, shady grove and good well water to recommend it. Attendees could travel on the Cincinnati, Wabash, and Michigan Railroad, paying full fare on the way to the campground, but only a penny a mile on the way home. The Farmersburg location could be easily reached via the Evansville and Terre Haute Railroad, on which Adventists paid 4 cents a mile. It too was within a half mile of the depot. Now, Mr. Bennett, who was a Christian, but not an Adventist, offered the use of his shady grove and some lumber free of charge. Well, across the dirt road, Mr. McClanahan, also a non-Adventist, offered the use of his field for the horse teams and opened his home as a B&B for Adventist guests. Sands Lane was happily disappointed. There's that beautiful phrase again. I hope you're learning to use it on the campground. I was happily disappointed in the delicious food at the Chuck Wagon last night. Happily disappointed to see 150 Adventists, 50 of them newly converted, attending the 18 discourses, and 1,200 strangers came in on Sunday. The conference provided a provision tent for food, a book tent for selling Adventist literature, and then 10 rented family tents. On Sabbath, 25 individuals came forward for prayers, and on Monday, 24 of them received baptism in the nearby creek. as 1,500 people and between 200 and 300 horses watched. The final meeting of the camp meeting occurred at 6 a.m. Their morning manna was an hour earlier than yours here. 6 a.m. and 200 people showed up. I never witnessed as good order and attention in a Grove meeting as we had here, day and night. Elder W.R. Bennett, the host, exclaimed. The 1884 and 85 camp meetings convened under a beautiful oak and maple grove a mile from the center of Logansport, then a city of 17,000 inhabitants. Adventists paid 1/3 the regular fare on the Wabash, St. Louis, and Pacific Railroad. Attendees pitched their tents in neat, orderly rows. Guest speakers included Stephen Haskell, here with his wife Hetty from Massachusetts, and Isaac D. Van Horn, here with his wife as well. On the first Sabbath, 40 individuals came forward for prayers. On the second Sabbath, 75 did so. As the meetings came to a close, J.M. Rees and J.P. Henderson baptized 34 souls in the nearby river. The following year, over at Logansport, upwards of 700 campers pitched between 80 and 90 family tents. They thrilled to the spirited preaching of General Conference President George I. Butler, as well as his successor, O.A. Olson, and Dudley M. Canright, shown here with his lovely wife, Lucretia. Believers rejoiced that nearly 200 converts had joined the church during the summer tent meetings, and 20 of those converts were baptized at the camp meeting, and 7 new companies were organized. To better accommodate the Adventists in the southwestern Indiana and southeastern Illinois Conference, leaders in 1886 designated the 60-acre Worthington Fairgrounds with its shady groves, its free water supply, as the site for the August camp meeting, and Wabash, that would draw believers from the central part of Indiana, as the other site. Attendees were urged to bring some canned goods for the Indianapolis mission, and children eagerly anticipated the special meetings that were set aside for them. Hundreds of believers sat on the dressed pine board benches provided by a lumber dealer free of charge during the week. Are you comfortable in your seat this morning? How would you like to exchange it for a wooden bench? Remember 2-hour sermons? Yeah. Those of you with lower back problems, I don't think so. Then in late September, another camp meeting convened on the Wabash Fairgrounds at the end of Hill Street. Here, everyone enjoyed the preaching of GC President G.I. Butler, Stephen Haskell, D.M. Canright, and Eugene Farnsworth, who looks quite relatively young compared with the old graybeards. Eugene Farnsworth's sermons were excerpted in the local newspapers as well. At least 150 of the attendees had been converted at the summer tent meetings. 40 of them came forward for prayers, and William Covert and J.P. Henderson baptized 43 candidates, including one crippled woman who could not walk. Pastors in attendance, how do you baptize a crippled woman? Here's how they did it in the 19th century. They put her on a Civil War army cot, and they lowered her slowly into the water as 2,000 people watched. Yeah. No doubt, it was a special thrill for Conference President William Covert to participate in the ordination service for his own brother, John Covert, at this camp meeting. The 1887 camp meeting in early October convened on the State Exposition Grounds in Indianapolis, which was just a short 5-cent streetcar ride from the railroad depot downtown. Attendees who received half fare on all the railroads going into Indianapolis could also rent small family, or they could rent church tents for $2 or $3. According to the review, this was the first time that conference employees pitched all the tents. Previously, you pitched your own tent, successfully or unsuccessfully. And I think that was probably because this time there were 103 tents to be set up. The previous summer there had been only 70. Guest speakers included Eugene Farnsworth, Clement Elridge, and R.A. Underwood. Nearly 200 souls came forward for prayers, 20 were baptized, $4,000 was pledged for home and foreign missions. That'd be $250,000 in our money today, $250,000. For 1888, conference leaders decided to locate the camp meeting on a 20-acre lot near the shores of Lakeside Park in Warsaw. This finely shaded park, situated between two lakes at the northern end of town, had been donated to Adventists free of charge by a local businessman. It contained a 70-foot by 100-foot tabernacle and room for 30 tents. Days later, a second camp meeting convened at Bruce's Grove near the northeastern edge of Indianapolis, adjacent to the Lackawanna, Erie, and Wabash Railroad. Once again, family tents could be rented, and provision tents sold health foods. John Covert urged every Adventist member to attend in order to gain increased spirituality, to defeat Satan's plans to keep you away, to gain lessons from the teaching and preaching, to quicken your conscience, to encourage God's servants, the ministers, in their labors, and to receive God's blessings. Those are good reasons for going to camp meeting, aren't they? About 300 Adventists attended the meetings, no doubt recalling warm memories of the 6 camp meetings that had been held near Kokomo in the 1870s. Church officials scheduled the only summer gathering for 1889 in a shady grove called the Park View Addition, half a mile from the Kokomo Junction Railroad Depot in the northeastern part of town. For the first time in the conference's history, the evening meetings were lit not by isolated kerosene lamps, but by natural gas, piped onto the grounds from the center of town. 100 family tents were also pitched. Guest speakers included the new General Conference President, Ole Olson, the editor of the American Sentinel, Elliot J. Wagoner, shown here with his lovely wife, and Robert Kilgore, the Illinois Conference President. Attendees could read summaries of their sermons in the Indianapolis Daily newspaper, available for 13 cents a copy. Let us sum up then the condition of Adventism here in Indiana in the 1880s. The 1880s saw the expansion of evangelism, the consolidation of organizations, and the rapid growth of Adventist membership across the Indiana Conference. The number of ordained and licensed ministers grew by 50%, from 10 to 15. Well, the number of companies and churches tripled from 20 in 1880 to 56 by 1889. The year Adventist membership topped 1,150. Yet the financial resources in the conference treasury fluctuated wildly throughout the decade. In 1884, the conference had $4.47 in the treasury. In 1887, however, there were $6,770 in the treasury. The 1880s was also the first decade in which tent evangelism was largely carried out by a conference-paid team of local Hoosier ministers, with no ministers coming from outside the conference. Instead, a group of about a dozen workers, credentialed and licensed ministers, tent masters, call porters, Bible workers, as well as representatives of the Tract Missionary Society and the Health and Temperance Association, blanketed the state with Adventist tents, literature, and lectures. By 1889, they had entered every one of Indiana's 92 counties. There's something to celebrate. They finally made it all the way down south, holding meetings in tents, halls, and local churches. At the same time, however, they faced growing and relentless opposition that took the form of frequent clashes with Disciples of Christ debaters. And the doors of local Methodist, Episcopal, Baptist, Presbyterian, Quaker, and Mormon churches were often closed to them. They also faced rising hostility from spiritualists without and dissidents within Adventist ranks. Finally, diseases, fires, tornadoes, heavy rains, snowstorms, and those impassable, knee-deep, muddy roads sometimes hindered their meetings as well. Despite these challenges, at least 25 new churches and companies were organized during the 1880s. Greensboro, Sevastopol, and Walkerton in 1880. There's the list. Kewanee in 81, Jonesboro, Fowler, Kokomo, Northfield, Farmersburg, and Denver in 83, Hartford City and Prairie Creek in 84, Radnor, Akron, Duggar, Mud Lick, Pleasant Lake, and Poseyville in 86, Waldron, Indianapolis, Napanee, and Maxwell in 88, and for Maxwell, it's two churches because the first one burned down, Angola in 89. In addition, Adventists erected 26 new houses of worship, as they were now being called. And most of them look like this. This is the Walkerton Seventh-day Adventist Church. We also saw the proliferation of these houses of worship, and they provided new places for Sabbath schools and other gatherings to be held. Between 1880 and 89, at least 80 Sabbath schools, quarterly meetings, T&M Society gatherings, and Health and Temperance Association conventions met across the Indiana Conference. Thanks to the efficient organization of the Conference T&M Society, at least 7 evangelists and 20 other workers spread Adventist literature around the state like the leaves of autumn. Dozens of books, scores of tracts and pamphlets, hundreds of periodicals, and thousands of pages of Adventist books reached the public during the 1880s. Thanks to the efficiency of the Health and Temperance Society, established in 1879, the Adventist health message would also be more widely disseminated, not only during evangelistic meetings, but also within Adventist churches. We also saw that at least 26 Adventist congregations actively participated in sharing the principles of healthful living. Members also incorporated those principles into their own lives, and as a result, fewer Hoosier Adventists were now struggling to give up tobacco, coffee, tea, and pork than in the 1870s. As they had during the 1860s and 70s, the annual summer or fall camp meetings in the 1880s continued to be both evangelistic and revivalistic in focus. And the campgrounds were moved to different locations each year. As we saw, Rochester in 80, Marion in 81 and 82, Farmersburg in 83 and 4, Logansport in 84 and 5, Worthington and Wabash in 86, Indianapolis, Warsaw, and Sullivan in 87 and 8, and back to Kokomo in 89. These gatherings grew ever larger as well, with scores of family tents, hundreds of Adventist members, and thousands of strangers attending the meetings, at which dozens of people came forward for prayers, and many of them accepted baptism. In our final moments, let's dip into the 1890s. I know some of you have told me I'm just eager to get to the 1890s. I want to get to that Holy Flesh movement, so let's do the 1890s, just dip into it here in our 5 final minutes. The Congregating Saints is what I entitled the 1890s. If the 1880s might be called the decade of expansion, then the 1890s could be nicknamed the decade of consolidation, as the Indiana Conference increased the number and efficiency of all of its institutions and organizations. Although the conference had slightly over 1,000 members in 1890, by 1900, 10 years later, it would have about 2,000 Adventists scattered throughout the 92 counties. When the 1890 session met at Frankfurt, the chief concern of the 35 delegates and the 14 ministers was the threat of a national Sunday law if this man, United States Senator Blair, his bill passed Congress. Therefore, they voted to give their full support to the National Religious Liberty Association's work in Indiana and combat the rapid progress of the National Reform Association, whose members intended to pass a national Sunday law. In addition, they voted to bring about a reformation in their tithe paying, to increase the amount of members' mission offerings, and to encourage every Hoosier young person to attend Battle Creek College. In the midst of electing Frank Starr as their new president, W.A. Young as their secretary, and William Hill as their treasurer, they paused to pray for the family of Jacob Butcher, the delegate from Unionville, who died suddenly on the second Sunday morning of the session. They also recognized that the Indiana Conference was bleeding ministers. Elder Nelson Cauble had left for South Dakota. Former President William Covert had moved to Missouri. His brother John Covert now preached in Michigan. And Elder F.M. Roberts had gone to Virginia. In 1891, when the delegates convened in Noblesville to re-elect the same three leaders, the conference was down to 7 ordained ministers and 6 licensed ones. But a year later, the 1892 session met in Indianapolis. The number of ministers had risen by 1 to 14. The conference now boasted 55 churches with 1,359 members, and the treasury had $276 in it. Once again, the 57 delegates re-elected the same slate of officers and voted they were going to pay off the conference debt as soon as possible. The situation brightened in 1893 when those who gathered once again in Indianapolis learned that the conference now had 1,402 members, 54 churches, 71 Sabbath schools, and over $10,000 in annual tithes and $545 in mission offerings. To serve the needs of the rapidly growing constituency, the same 3 leaders hired 9 credentialed ministers, 8 licensed ones, and 5 women Bible workers who held missionary licenses. The outlook improved even further in 1894 when once again everyone who convened in North Indianapolis learned that a zealous band of 22 canvassers had sold over $11,000 of Adventist literature the previous year. That would be equivalent to $250,000 in our money today. Amazing, amazing. In 1895, however, everyone applauded the change of venue to Anderson, where both the camp meeting and the business sessions met in Shady Side Park. And it's still there today. Lovely park. They call it Shady Side Memorial Park today, where both the camp meeting and business sessions met. Reports revealed that the conference now had 1,675 members, 8 credentialed ministers, 7 licensed ones, and 12 female Bible workers with missionary licenses. During the session, R.M. Harrison and Sidney S. Davis received ordination. The delegates voted that these ministers should enter new fields as evangelists and not to hover over Adventist congregations as local pastors. A year later, however, at a Bible Workers Institute in Indianapolis, attendees discussed the burning question: can our churches be kept alive without ministerial help? Conference leaders also created a brand new paper in 1895 and 6 entitled the Indiana Reporter, which would continue in print until 1911. Figuring that most of you have never heard of it, I brought a copy down with me from Andrews, and I will put it on display there on the table in just a moment. I have a hunch that after 1895, many conference activities appeared here in the Indiana Reporter rather than in the Review and Herald, simply because we find no records of Indiana business sessions in the latter paper, the Review, for 1895 to 1899, although we know the sessions were held at the annual camp meetings, which are recorded in the Review. We do know that from January 20 to 30, 1898, the first Institute for Church Elders and Parents convened in Indianapolis to instruct the elders in how to carry out their duties and to instruct parents in how to make home life brighter and better. Presenters at that conference, there's the Indiana Reporter, presenters at that conference included George and Nettie Irwin, the new General Conference president, Elder J.H. Morrison. From Michigan, Elder Isaac D. Van Horn, and the universally loved and adored Sarepta Myrenda Irish Henry. Her best friends called her Smy for her initials. She was a famous American WCTU spokeswoman who converted to Adventism at Battle Creek Sanitarium when she was recovering from an illness. Attendees received their food and lodging free. In 1899, a new up-and-coming minister named R.S. Donnell was chosen as the president of the Indiana Conference. He was described in the Review and Herald as a man who has the confidence of the people. A year later, the church paper reported that Indiana had gained 412 new converts, and this pushed Adventist membership to nearly 2,000. These members had raised $3,000 to pay off the conference debt. We're having trouble with the clicker again. And they sold 1,300 copies of Ellen White's new book, Christ Object Lessons, at 9 local camp meetings that year. R.S. Donnell boasted, "The work is onward in Indiana." I want you to keep that name in mind, R.S. Donnell and Stanley Davis. Their names will come up this afternoon when we talk about the Holy Flesh movement. And we will cover what it was and why Ellen White spoke so strongly against it. So once again, invite all your friends from Evansville and Muncie to come and hear the truth about their roots. And we will be very open and frank with you about that. So let's close with prayer. Loving Lord, we thank you for bringing us together this morning. We thank you for the slightly cooler temperatures. We pray that you may keep the fires of dedication alive in our hearts as we look back to what the pioneers here in Indiana accomplished. We are their debtors. Without the sacrifices that they made, we would not be here. 15 of our churches in Indiana were established in the 19th century. And may they keep going. May they be bright lights in their neighborhoods for Jesus until he comes again to take us home to heaven, where we will meet these pioneers face to face. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Again, you may come forward and look at the